So let us discuss in detail the essential elements of valid contract. Already we have covered this proper offer and proper acceptance. That is, if you want to have a valid agreement, you should make an offer and that offer should be accepted. Only then it becomes a valid agreement. Okay. So that's what we have already discussed. Now let's move on to the next point. That is intention to create legal relationship. That is when you enter into a contract, the ultimate intention should be to create a legal relationship. And that should be very clear through the form of offer and the way in which it is accepted. So the intention should be to impose a duty on promisor to fulfill the promise. And the promisee has got right on promise, that is he can claim for its fulfillment. So the contract should not only give rise to moral obligation, but what is more important is it should give rise to legal obligation. So if this intention is lacking, then it is not a valid contract. So understand, the intention of any contract should be to create a legal relationship. We'll take this case study. It is a very old case study, Balfour versus Balfour. Here, the husband agreed to pay certain amount every month while he was in abroad. But after some time he failed to pay. So what happened is wife sued him in court of law, but she could not recover or she could not win that case because it was a social agreement. It's not a contractual agreement. Here, the parties had no intention to create any legal obligations, and whatever he promised to pay was on account of the social agreement or the social relationship. So that cannot be brought under Contract Act. Okay. So when you create a contract, you have to ensure that that contract gives rise to legal relationship, but that does not happen in case of husband and wife because that relationship cannot be brought under Contract Act. Okay, let's move on. The major factor which have to be kept in mind is when you sign up for a contract, you have to ensure there is a lawful consideration. Lawful consideration is an essential element of a valid contract. So now let's understand what is consideration. Consideration means quid pro quo, that is something in return. Let's say Mr. A agrees to sell books to Mr. B for rupees 100. So here Mr. B is promising to pay rupees 100. This is the consideration Mr. B pay for books. Okay. And Mr. A promises to sell books. So this is the consideration which Mr. A pays for receiving rupees 100. Okay. So this is about consideration. Next point is lawful object. When you have an agreement, the object of the agreement must be lawful. It should not be illegal, it should not be immoral, it should not be opposed to public policy. Let's say for example, Mr. A promises to carry out robbery and B promises a reward for robbery and eventually B does not pay. So here Mr. A cannot claim because the agreement is void right from the beginning because the objective of the agreement is unlawful. So if the object of agreement is unlawful, then if object of the agreement is unlawful, then it becomes void ab initio, that is invalid right from beginning. Okay, move on. The next important point is competent parties. So this is one of the essential feature of a valid contract. That is, the parties to the contract must have capacity, must have legal ability to make a valid contract. So understand, they should have capacity, they should have legal ability. And the assent of the parties, that is their acceptance, is must. If either of the parties is deprived use of his normal understanding, or if the law deems that they have not attained that level of understanding, then such agreement will not bind. So please be clear. When we say competent parties, it means the parties to the contract must have the capacity or the legal ability to make a valid contract, because only when they have capacity or legal ability they can give assent. And for giving assent, if they are deprived of use of understanding, or if the law deems that they are deprived or they have not attained such understanding level, then those kind of agreement will not bind on them. And for that we have to refer to section 11. Section 11 provides that every person are competent to contract, provided, meaning there is an exception. People who have not attained the age of majority, they cannot enter into a contract. People who are not of sound mind, people who are disqualified from contracting by any law. Okay, so people who have not attained age of majority, people who don't have sound mind, or people who are disqualified from contracting by any law, then they are not eligible for entering into a contract. So people who have not attained the age of majority, they are basically minors. People who are not of sound mind, okay, and people who are disqualified from contracting by any law. It is possible you cannot have a contract with alien enemy, you cannot have contract with foreign sovereigns or accredited representatives of foreign state, or you cannot have contract with insolvents, you cannot have contract with convicts. So in those cases the competency is tested. Next, let's focus on consent. Free consent is important. Consent given for contract should be genuine. What is consent? Consent means agree upon same thing in same sense. You have to agree upon same thing. That is, both the parties should agree upon same things in the same sense. That is, there should be consensus ad idem. Consents, if it is not free, or say if consent is obtained by way of coercion or undue influence or fraud or misrepresentation or mistake, then in such cases the contract will become voidable at the option of party whose consent is not free. Okay, so consent, if it is obtained through coercion or undue influence or fraud or misrepresentation or mistake, in such cases the contract will become voidable at the option of the party whose consent was not free. Next, agreement should not be expressly declared void. If you are entering into an agreement, that agreement should not be illegal. It should not be void. So now what is void? Void agreement means those agreement which has no legal effects. They have no legal effects. Then what is illegal agreement? Because we talked about two things. Agreement should not be illegal, agreement should not be void. Void means no legal effect. Then what is illegal agreement? Illegal agreements are those agreements which are expressly or impliedly prohibited by law. If you are going to enter into an agreement which is going to restrict you from carrying out any trade, or restrict you from marriage, or restrict you from legal proceedings, they are void agreements. Okay, or put it otherwise, if an agreement is going to result in restraint of trade or marriage or legal proceedings, then we call it as void agreement. Then what is illegal agreement? The agreements which are prohibited by Indian Penal Code, like for murder, publishing defamatory statements, agreements opposed to public policies, okay, these are all illegal agreements. Fine. So what you have to ensure is the agreement is not void, not illegal. Then comes certainty of meaning. Whatever you agree upon should be certain. It should not be vague. It should not be indefinite. Let's take a small example. Let's say Mr. A agrees to sell B 100 tons of oil. This is not a valid agreement. This is a vague agreement because there is no mention about type of oil, which oil is going to be sold. Next, possibility of performance. Whatever terms you have in agreement should be capable of performance. If you are going to have an agreement to do an impossible act, then that agreement cannot be enforced at all. Let's say, for example, Mr. A agrees with B to discover treasure by magic. This agreement cannot be enforced because you have an impossible act. Then finally comes the compliance of legal formalities. If a particular contract type requires by law that it should be in writing, it should be registered, then it should be complete in all formalities like writing, attestation, registration. Otherwise, that particular agreement becomes unenforceable by law. So, these are all the broad features or salient features of agreement. So, let's just summarize. If you want to have a valid contract, there should be a proper offer, proper acceptance. Intention should be to create a legal relationship. There should be a lawful consideration. The party should have capacity to contract. Their consent should be free. Agreement should not be declared void or illegal. There should be certainty of meaning. There should be possibility of performance, and necessary legal formalities regarding the contract structure should be complied with.